This is a quick leap-ed bright idea on how to make Google Forms formative. Formative assessment with Google Forms. Okay, so this is a 15-minute video on how to use Google Forms, but the best way to use this video is to use it while also practicing on a Google Form. The best way to learn is to do. So make sure while you're watching, have a Google Form open and set up some test quizzes to practice the features as you go along. And this will make what I'm talking about in the video far more relevant to you. So Google Forms are a really, really great way to test students' knowledge and understanding. However, it also contains some really nice features that make marking easy for teachers. This, in turn, will increase participation in the task and gives teachers some really, really good data to inform the planning. So this is an app that I'm advocating for use in the classroom. It also could be used post-MCO when we're back at school for any sort of homework tasks. So I really feel like this is worth teachers' investment in working out how to use it properly. So the first thing you need to do is to set up the form. When you're first starting with this, it works best with correct or incorrect questions. Anything that's true, false, yes, no, multiple choice. So on first inspection, it will look like a summative assessment. Now, this form that I'm going to take you through, I set up as part of a CPD session. Now, I'm training a group of teachers on using feedback in the remote classroom. So what I did is I set them up a flipped learning task. I gave them some videos and some questions to look at about the topic, and then this quiz was used at the end to see how much they learnt. Now, this gave me some really, really nice data. It gave me some understanding of how much my group understood the concepts of assessment for learning, and it also highlighted some really key misconceptions that I am able to look at when I go back face to face in the training room. Now, this is really, really good for me because I don't know my students very well. I've never worked with them before. This is a remote CPD session, so all the information I have about them is vital so that I set the tasks at the right level. Now, for you in your classroom, it's also important that you know your students' common misconceptions, because that will help you plan the next stage. This is an example of asynchronous learning, but this is an asynchronous learning task that can be used to inform the planning of my synchronous learning. It's a way for a summative assessment of learning to become formative. So the first thing I did was I set up a form. Go to start a new form in your Google Drive, and there's some templates and stuff. And once you set up a blank one, you will see this. Now, this is where you need to add your questions. And I would advise that you read through your questions very, very carefully, because actually setting good questions is quite tricky and does need some thinking through. So once you've set your questions and you've scaffold them easy questions at the start to hard questions at the end. And then you go to that little cog in the top corner to make sure the settings are done correctly to make this a formative assessment. So these are the settings you'll see. These are the the first tab is general. Now, in order to do the feedback properly, I need to collect email addresses. I also need response receipts. I also want to require sign-in because I don't want my participants to do this quiz more than once. And I do not want them to edit after they submit. I want to know what their first reactions were to the questions. I don't want them to see what other students in the class or other participants in the class have done. So I've taken off summary charts and text responses. My second setting that I've looked at is quizzes. So I've made this a quiz and I've assigned points values to the questions. I've also allowed auto grading. Now, on this, you've got the decision to make. I think allowing the students to see their grades immediately after submission is really powerful because it's instant feedback, and actually it makes using Google Forms better than giving a quiz in the classroom. I also want respondents to see if they've missed any questions. I want them to know the correct answers. I don't want them to go away from this quiz thinking, oh my gosh, I don't know anything. I want them to see what the correct answers were so they can study more. So those are the options that I've picked. I also, I haven't, this is only a short quiz, it's only 9 questions long, so I'm not going to show a progress bar, but I do not want the questions to be shuffled, because I've scaffolded those questions easy to hard. I also have added a confirmation message at the end, so I've said thank you for their answers, but I've also given them a quick call to action, and please take some time to review any answers you got incorrect. So this will prompt my participants to look back over their answers and see how they did. Once I set up the form, I set a deadline for the completion, and then as a teacher, I'm able to look at the data and see what I should do next. And this part is the key to making Google Forms formative. Now, the first thing to note about this is that you don't have to wait for all the responses to come in before you can start doing this. So my deadline for this task is Wednesday. It's now Sunday, but I'm interested in how my students have done, and I want to plan their face-to-face session. So I'm going to look at their summary responses and see what sort of level everyone's at so that I can plan that session. Now, you can see from my summary, on average, people got 7 out of 9 questions right. Now, this is good for me because I didn't want the questionnaire to be too hard, but I didn't want it to be too easy. I wanted there to be some element of challenge. So I'm pretty pleased that most people have got about 70 out of 100 correct. I also can use the data to see which questions most of my participants missed. Now, like I said, this is a Google form about assessment for learning, and I put 2 questions in there that were key to my face-to-face training. The first one was formative assessment techniques can be used after a summative assessment, e.g. exam, to improve outcomes. Now, most people got this wrong. Now, because most people got this wrong, this is why I've made this video, which I'm releasing to my course participants, but I'm also going to put on Bright Ideas later. So this is a dual purpose. The question 9, this quiz is an example of formative assessment. That is kind of a trick question because actually the quiz itself is a summative assessment, but what I'm doing with it now makes it formative. So, like I said, I've scaffolded the questions. I'm pretty pleased. Question 1, everyone got right. That means they've got a good basic understanding. And it's question 8 and 9 that lots of people got wrong. So these I can address in my face-to-face. But also I'm quite pleased with this because it means it wasn't too easy, because there's nothing worse than a patronising quiz. So, and I'm also really interested by, this is the question number 9, because that is a really talking point to my face-to-face training, and something that I'm going to use this data to make that discussion powerful. Now, here we come to where I feel Google Forms is really, really powerful. We know that feedback in the classroom is the most powerful single modification that can enhance the achievement of a child. So what I'm keen on at the moment in this remote learning is to use what we know from normal classrooms to make online classrooms more useful, more real, better learning. So John Hattie has said feedback is important, so I'm very interested in how I can make my feedback online. And Google Forms gives a really easy way to give feedback to students. So as I said, this was a summative quiz, and I'm now going to make it a formative assessment. So I want you to imagine this is like a midterm exam. You've set the learning, this is their assessment of learning. Now, I'm not going to change the grade on the students' work. Even with the feedback I've given, I'm not going to give them an opportunity to go back and change their answers. Their grade is their grade. But I am going to help students improve their outcomes by giving feedback. Now, in my case, this is not students, it's participants, but you see what I mean. I'm also going to plan another task later to see how much they've improved when I've given the feedback. And this is an example of an AFL Tip technique. So I'm collecting and analysing evidence to move learning forward. I established my initial learning objectives. I've now given a quick quiz to identify the students' learning needs, and now I need to decide how I'm going to meet those needs. And in order to meet those needs, I've decided to make this video and to give feedback to my participants' answers. Now, with feedback, there are lots of ways to give feedback. 2 stars and a wish is a really common one. Now, in my case, I have this criteria for success when I'm giving feedback. When I give feedback, I want it to be specific, mindful, actionable, respectful, and timely. And I use this criteria of success whenever I'm doing my feedback. Now, you can see from my responses, I've had 25 responses to my quiz, and I've seen the summary, and now I'm going to go to the individual answers. How am I going to do this quickly? I'm going to set up a Word doc. I'm going to choose specific questions that I will feed back on. You don't have to feed back on every single question in the Google Doc. Choose the ones that are most relevant. When I've written out my answers, I'm going to read those aloud to myself to ensure that there's good spelling, punctuation and grammar before I copy and paste it into individual feedback. And I'm also going to have a look to see if there are any participants who deserve a special message from me. So anyone that got 9 out of 9, or anyone that I recognise as someone that didn't necessarily have to complete the task. For students, this might be a student who does this for the first time. When you go into Google Forms, you will have this button which says Add Individual Feedback. Now you can see for question 1 and 2, most people got that right, so I'm not going to add any individual feedback for that. But I am going to add a personal message, and the way that I'm going to add that personal message is I'm going to add feedback to the answers for name. And that personal message will be an example of how I give respectful feedback. So I'm going to say thank you for taking the time to complete the quiz. Now I'm talking to teachers and I know they're busy, so I'm going to highlight that I know they're busy. I'm also going to give a special message to people that got full marks. I'm also going to give a special message to anyone who I notice. So for example, some school leaders did the quiz. They didn't have to, they're not participants in my training, but I'm really impressed that they've done that. So I'm going to send them a special message as well. And I'm also going to put a call to action. Please double check any incorrect answers you got before our training session, so they use the feedback as much as they can. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to be specific. So I'm only going to choose certain questions that will help me to give feedback on. Now for this, I've chosen question 3 and question 9. Now this was my first attempt at this. I'm also playing and practicing. I wrote this individual feedback. Now I think this is too long. So when I do this next time, I'm going to cut down the number of words and make sure that it's very easy to read. I also am going to make the feedback actionable. Now that's why I've made this video, because the participants in my CPD will be given a link to this video so that they can themselves make Google Forms formative for their students. You could do this for anything though. Say you got a student who got a certain concept wrong in a science or a geography test, you could include a link to a YouTube video that will explain the concept through to them again. You might not want to set that task to every single student, so you can use the add feedback button to send them to the right place. I'm also, in this case, I'm going to highlight some correct answers as well. In particular, correct answers that are key to the understanding of the topic. So this quiz is an example of formative assessment. That is the theme for my training session. So I'm going to highlight why the participant got the answer right, as well as why they got it wrong. Now the reason for that is I want to make sure it wasn't a lucky guess, and I just want to draw their attention to why they got that answer right, and this will help them understand moving forward. Now when I've done this, I'm going to go to release scores. Now this is a really handy thing about Google. You don't have to send out your responses to all the respondents at once. You can choose who to go to first. So you could mark 5 at a time, for example, and that's absolutely fine. And you also can do this as many times as you want. So I've written a quick message. Please click on the view score to see your feedback. You'll understand why I've done that in a minute. And then I'm going to click the participants who I'm going to send an email to, and I'm going to send emails and release the score. And when I do that, they will receive an email that looks like this. It says your score has been released for the pre-task quiz. Please click on the score to view feedback. Now you'll notice that's the message that I sent them because I want them to action this. And then they click view. And when they click view, they can see all of the feedback that I've given them on their answers, and they can act accordingly. Now this is what makes this effective feedback, because I can do it quickly, I can do it personally, and I can do it very actionably and in a respectful and timely way. There was one annoying thing about this, which I noticed. When you use the default colours for your Google form, when you use purple, for some reason Google does not show the view button. It disappears. So one thing that I would give you a piece of advice is make sure the colour of your quiz is not set to default. So, post-remote learning, how can I use this? I'm very keen that everything we learn in this MCO is useful when we go back into the classroom. And I think this is a really, really good thing that we could use for homework. It's really timely, it increases participation, and it gives really, really good data to inform planning. So that is my 15-minute guide to formative Google Forms. If you want more ideas like this, join our Telegram group or search for Leap Ed Bright Ideas. Thank you very much.